So today, what are we talking about? Anybody have any idea?
Spellcasting.
Oh, good, good. Okay, that's what I had in my notes.
Someone came prepared.
Did anybody bring any of their own spell work along that we might talk about later? Cool.
I didn't know that we had homework, I'm sorry. I didn't either.
It's all right.
I just came straight from final exam, so.
Ooh, cool. How'd that go?
Yeah, I got a 91.
Hey, way to go, Poppin. Nice job. Everybody is familiar with witchcraft or has worked with witchcraft before. Cool. So, yeah.
This was a Minecraft meetup.
Right.
I think you're in the wrong group.
That's next door. Yeah, I was going to say, do you want to? Thank you. So yeah, spell casting. All of our sermons, we have conversations with this, so it's interactive, so you can feel free to interrupt. Just raise your hand and I can get you, or else I will just steamroll straight through, just so you know, because I will talk for hours. Evidenced by our YouTube channel, actually, which is 16 hours of me talking about witchcraft stuff. So if you ever have a desire to watch that much witchcraft or deal with me talking that long, by all means, feel free. So my name is Andrews. I'm the Hierophant of the Church of Witchcraft, and that's basically just the head of stuff. And we're mostly just fancy librarians with a penchant for magic, so nothing too crazy. We try not to focus too much on like what roles are. Most people here are going to be local to Colorado Springs, and so what that means also is that the Coven of Insight is a part of the Church of Witchcraft. So if you have interest in Coven, or if you just want to check out what it's like, feel free to reach out to us and we can get you connected to them as well. So the Church of Witchcraft is a not-for-profit organization, and we're actually going to be filing for our 501c3 next month, thankfully, thanks to all the members who have signed up and done all that work to get us to that point. So that's an exciting thing. We will do bigger, fun things with that too. Also, thanks to YouTube and whatever platform you'll be watching on today as well. We just appreciate you guys being here. And if you haven't yet, you can hit the like and subscribe button somewhere below. I'm sure the platform's going to change by the time you watch this. My personal type of witchcraft is celestial witchcraft. Celestial witchcraft is essentially just astrology on steroids. I can go into a long explanation of that if you want to at some point in time, but not everybody needs to have a specific definition of their witchcraft. They may just be doing witchcraft, and it doesn't actually need a title of any iteration. And maybe one comes to you. I know that Gwen is a green witch. This is Gwen. I know Poppin's just exploring at this point in time, getting the answers that he wants.
And you didn't say I'm a brown witch.
I think there's plenty of those.
Should have done that. I'm going to get you to write our scripts from now on. And it changes. People have different variations for their witchcraft. Whatever it is that they want to specifically call it is up to them. Very common branches that you'll hear of are Gardnerian Wicca, Dianic Wicca, you'll hear British traditional witchcraft. Those are pretty large segments. You'll hear Thelema as well as another really large one. And witchcraft varies amongst them, and how they're expressed changes depending on that. But none of those are necessary. We hold the first altar concept. Witch is their first altar. They take in magic, they do some stuff with it, and they put it back out in the world to manifest something. And so whatever that manifests as is for you to choose, right? You can have a system or tradition that already exists, or you can select something different or create your own. It's all there for you to make your decisions about. So thankfully I was reminded that we are doing spell work tonight. I totally didn't forget. I have a whole set of notes for it. So spells are basically a set of instructions. So spells in general, we talk and interchange these terms a lot. So when people say spell, what exactly is it that we're talking about? What do we mean by that? And essentially, I consider them a set of instructions. They can come in a lot of different forms, which is why we're here. I also have a paper on this about just spell, like in a truncated form that is just spell work, so it can help you design and build your own spells. Because you have to wonder, so you read books, you might read Buckland, or you might read something about Dianic Wicca, or you might read another witchcraft source of some type, and it'll just have a spell list in there. My question was, where did those come from? Who made them? Because somebody had to write them down. Someone had to start that spell somewhere at some point. Was it the author? Did the author get it from somewhere? Who were they crediting, right? And that started me wondering, where do they come from? And there's a lot of history about spells in general. You can find them You can find a lot of history on spells through Richard Keifer, Keikheiffer. It's a history of magic and basically talks about origins and where you find magic in history. And it also brings in Christianity aspects as well of where their magic came in, because that totally was the thing. Oddly, what I found in that book is that a lot of what historical, we'll go with charms. A lot of those charms come from, they're between kingdoms. So one king will gift another king a certain charm or amulet or something along those lines. So it's actually in their financial records, and it's in their records of like where their treasury is and that sort of thing is where a lot of their spells or charms and enchantments were coming from. So you'll find that there versus just like written in a book somewhere. Christianity has some interesting roots. A lot of it's influenced by Gnosticism as one older example of that. And I think this is a holdover from that. So Christianity also used to do blessings. What is blessing? But a set of instructions. And they would actually,
I'm just curious, do you know about the Witch's Bible?
What about it specifically?
I mean, like, the ones that the nuns used, like, they're written by, I've never seen it.
Right.
I just know of it, that the nuns would cast literally out of Witch's Bible.
Fascinating. I will have to look that up, or you can send that to us too. Or just a link, or even like a Wikipedia. That'd start me somewhere.
I've never found any physical evidence of that. It's like one of those things.
We'll start Googling it. It circles around.
All the Googling, right?
Yeah.
But similarly, it kind of goes along those lines. Like you'll see priests that had exorcist Bibles and like exorcist tomes of how to deal with spirits and devils and that sort of thing. And that's pretty close to when you start talking about ceremonial magic, for example, and summoning demons in the Ars Goetia and the Keys of Solomon. I find that keeps coming up a lot this last week is the Keys of Solomon. There's 5 books of those, and they have interaction with angels, interaction with demons. It just depends on what you're looking at. Anyways, so the Christian magics, they would do bed blessings. So they would actually put a cross with like words and stuff for a blessing, and they would put it underneath the mattress of a birth bed for impact on a healthy birth. And I was like, I'm pretty sure that's just a spell. Almost 100% that's just a spell. And then this starts getting a little bit too liberal, meaning that it's too inclusive. So what I mean by that is, if spells are just a set of instructions, then does that extend to literally every set of instructions?
Yes.
So is a baptism a spell then?
Kind of. It's a ritual. Maybe a ceremony. Well, I'll get there. I'm going to put that down so I don't forget it. I'm going to write on this high quality board.
Yes. Make her feel useful.
It's gotta be the guy, because it's useless.
If it didn't get picked up, we should be in a small enough area, but baptism is one thing that they were talking about, just what is a baptism and how do spells interact with that. You also see spells that were very common for farming. Farming was a big deal, agriculture in general. So spells for crops, spells for harvest, so on and so forth. Were just a giant, huge database of spell work in general. And they would instruct, we want the eastern winds to come in, we want, better water, or we want less plagues. So you'll see a lot of the agricultural sector in history referencing spells. Across the globe, and across, it's not just everywhere and across history. So you'll see it all across the globe. You're not going to see it relegated just like one culture, one community. They may have different instructions. Their spells may shape a little differently depending on their climate, so on and so forth. Medicine is another big one, like I was mentioning with birth beds. Medicine was another huge aspect of spell casting in general. And this is where, we get some of the classic, the witch lives on the edge of society and puts together all these potions and stuff. Really, she's just a pharmacist without any sort of medical backing. And it could go wrong a little bit because there was no standard, right? And, it's not to take away from whatever magic is and to make it less magical, but it's just imbued with those things. And you'll find records of these, and these are good starting points to start looking for where your spells where you might start looking, because we want to find out where they began, and these are some of those roots. Essentially, these are functional tools, just like you would have with fire, right? Or you would have any number of different things that people have devised as Stone Age tools and that sort of thing. these tools are metaphysical tools that exist that we happen to cross, and then we use them as a functional tool within our lives to affect change in our environments, right? Are they supernatural? Maybe. I waffle on this. Could they be supernatural? And it's just above nature or over nature. Really be more along the lines of like uber natural. Who can translate natural to German?
Why are you looking at me? I don't know why you're looking at me. Hold on.
Kind of like Ubermensch, right? So the overman or the overmen concept, kind of the similar concept of being over nature, right? Not necessarily supernatural as in just deities, not just elements, but all of those kind of part of those things may be adjacent to nature in the metaphysical liminal space.
Natural in German is natürlich.
Naturally?
Natürlich.
Oh, wow. So it'd be naturally?
Sure.
Sure, okay.
Sounds alright.
If anybody wants to correct that, please put it in the comments below.
I don't speak German.
Another place that, so is it supernatural? It might be. I think that it is personally, but I also can see it as a realm of arguably pseudoscience, if not straight up science. So I'm going to go to neuro-linguistic programming. That is basically brain language instructions, neuro-linguistic programming. I have mentioned this on a number of occasions in other videos, but I think it's about you stating a thing and then programming your brain to respond in a certain way and then cueing yourself for that, and then you're seeing a change in manifestation. Now, is that manifestation made corporeal by a supernatural mean? Probably, would be my short answer. In neuro-linguistic programming, there are 4 main categories to this. Rapport, so how you interact and talk with a thing, right? So if it's a deity or an element or whatever your relationship is to the divine, that's one of them. The second is being sensory and aware, so aware of things that are going around. So you have to have that awareness along with this rapport. And outcome-minded, so wanting to get something out of this. So what instruction am I giving myself? What do I want to get out of this? What do I want to gain? And being aware of that. And then also having flexible behavior within that. So those 4 were rapport, awareness, outcome-minded, and flexible behavior for neuro-linguistic programming. A behavior-minded piece, that behavior outcome, is one of the important ones, right? So we do a spell, are we just doing a spell errantly? We're not just guessing at things, we want something out of it. And that's one of the things, so you have to have some sort of outcome-minded, or you aren't just doing random spells. I will say that modern chaos may press me on this and say, no, you don't need a purpose. And I guess maybe, but even so, if it's not a direct intent, then you're saying, if nothing's happening, then I want something to happen. There's still an outcome minded there, even if it's a chaotic thing, even if there's no instruction or direction to it. There's still nothing is happening and then something's happening. There's some outcome that's desired in that. Spellwork design. So again, sets of instructions, how we're doing this, right? What we want to do, what we want to influence, what we want to manifest. And these are going to go through, I'm trying to build into this so that we know where we're going. And we have the pieces of this when we're doing spellwork design as it continues to expand. Ritual ordering, sequences at a time. So sequences at a time is there a specific sequence that you do at a specific time? Right? Is there some sort of way that you want to ritualize your spellcraft, right? So if you're doing a spell working of some kind, are you making a ritual out of it? Or is it just a statement? Is it just a mantra, right? We'll talk a little bit more as we go through this. There are links to ceremony in this as well. So in a hierarchical sense, I tend to think of ceremonies contain rituals, rituals contain spells. So that would mean, obviously, that ceremonies have rituals that have spells in them. So spells are not necessarily it's a standalone tool. It's an occult technology of some kind that sets an instruction and a manifestation that you want. And that is, you can be inserted into a ritual, and then rituals can then be inserted into the ceremonies themselves. I'm sure that there's another aching question of what's the difference between a ceremony and a ritual? The difference between the two is a time factor. So ritual has to do with there's a cue that happens and there's an action that I do. Whereas a ceremony is a phase change. So I'm going to go from phase 1 to phase 2. So say, for example, I'm going to go from, a husband to a father, right? I'm having a child, right? There's a phase change there. Or maybe it's a birthday, phase change from one year to another year, or graduation. These are things that require phase changes, but it's not, and it's also a ritual. But the ceremony has that temporal component to it as well. So that's why there's a distinction there, because not all rituals are necessarily a change from one state to another. You know, I see the full moon, I do some sort of sequence of behaviors, and that might include a spell, which is a set of instructions. Whereas a ceremony is a bigger thing that wants to change. Let's say it's, you know, somebody's birthday on a full moon, I suppose. Let's just build on that concept.
That turns you into a werewolf.
Yes, exactly. So full moon on somebody's birthday could be a ceremony for the birthday, phase change, and then your ritual, the sequence of behaviors that you do, and you might cast a spell, a set of instructions in that ritual within that ceremony. If only I were a computer programmer, I don't think like them. This would be very explainable in coding language, because they tend to put things in other chunks, and they chunk things and put things into other categories, and that's not how my brain works. Yours does, I think.
Probably.
You could make you could make a whole program for how this works. I'm dead certain.
The programming part of Neuro-Linguistic Programming.
Yes. So how do we do spells? What do they look like? Chanting is a common one. Poems might be one. Mantras are another, so things like Om Namah Shivaya, for example, would be a mantra that you could use. Chanting, repetitive chants. When I was at the Witches' Ball, they chanted the elements 4 times in sequence, so they would do water, earth, air, fire, and then they would say water, 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 and then they continue through, and then you would loop back to the beginning. That, in that itself, is its own form of chanting. It's starting to stir up those energies, right? Wanting to start driving that intent. Where are we going with this? Why do I want to go there? This is setting my intent and bringing those into and making that call out. There is a component of charging a spell and then a discharge of that spell. So that charging is along those lines of that mantra or that chanting or that ritual that you're doing, is charging that up. Tools within a spell they might use. So Wiccans will often use athames, or they'll use wands, or they'll use bells. You know, you might see a variety of different tools across, and each one of those can be charged in that of themselves. The 3 C's, cleanse, consecrate, and charge, can be used with these tools and then used in conjunction with the spell. The spell has to be charged. You have to give it something to get something out of it, right? This is a classic input, transformation, output, right? I'm going to put something into the thing. I'm going to transform it in some manner, whether that's through some supernatural means or an elemental mean or something, and then an output occurs. And this goes back to that neuro-linguistic programming of being outcome-minded. This is where we're going to get into, we're going to jump the shark a little bit here. So we're going to get to some really complicated wording. So with this in mind, charging and then discharging a spell. There's a build-up and then a release of those things. The next one that we're going to talk about is theurgy and thaumaturgy.
No, 2 more minutes.
I know it's 2 more minutes, but I'm just giving you a break now because I'm about to go into a whole other segue.
Oh.
So now we're going to wait again. I'm going to look at myself later when I'm watching this video and I'm going to be like, what the hell am I doing? Am I okay?
Alright, so restart. So when you start talking, I'll restart.
Cool. So theurgy and thaumaturgy. Has anybody heard these words before?
Yes, I went to your seminar.
Hey!
That's on our sermon.
Yeah, summoner. We'll do a summoner later.
I watched the videos.
Oh, cool. So what was your take on those who have familiarity with these
Goodness.
terms? What did you get out of those?
It's very complicated.
Cool.
Wasn't like the, say them again.
What's theurgy? Let's go there first.
Wasn't that one with like where you connecting with the divine?
How you connect with the divine.
Right.
Is
Yeah.
that
And
spell just the orgy or what?
Theurgy.
I'll go ahead and write it down.
That's amazing.
Oh.
How did I not see that? I'm the worst.
He's got that brain for it.
That's my favorite word. Let's do that kind of spell work.
It is a thing.
It is a thing, yeah.
It is.
There's a whole thing on like sex magic.
So beautiful. So good.
Next topic.
This is turning into a whole different type of sermon over here.
Does that help?
Yes.
I didn't bring my glasses.
So theurgy
So,
is
yeah.
T-H-E-U-R-G-Y.
So close.
And then the other, once you get done, is thaumaturgy. T-H-A-U-A-T-U-R-G-Y. Thaumaturgy, theurgy. And also these two things are order and chaos. I'm sure you've seen this grid before.
Yeah.
I've studied it elsewhere. I'm not the one that invented this. Somebody else came up with this. It was amazing, so I'm using it. Go look at my videos for citations. Any other thoughts on theurgy or thaumaturgy?
Isn't thaumaturgy then like the more grounded, like connected to yourself aspects?
Yeah. Any other takes on it?
I don't know, just by what you said, that means that's up, that's down, literal.
Yeah, I mean, it's a helpful hint for
The
that. as
material
well.
realm and
It's
then
like more
the other
grounded and
realms.
then more spiritual.
Pretty simple,
Yep, basically.
okay.
Theurgy is a little, they go more in depth. They pull from Gnosticism in general. The reason that Gnosticism, okay, so the Gnostic faith used to have these. So Gnosticism, the knowing thyself thing, used to have these terms. When it got turned into Gnostics, this had to be split up because no longer was it Gnosticism, because then it referred to the Gnostic faith. And so it got complicated, so they just split these two out of it, basically. So you'll see this from Iamblichus, Neoplatonic philosopher. You will also see this from Iamblichus and Plotinus. Those two specifically went back and forth about how these things work. Not going to get super deep into it, but essentially, suffice to say, you have, I want to be more divine and be more connected with all is one, basically. This is, I am God, and I am self and divine. In that of myself, and I'm not necessarily connected to everything else.
That doesn't make sense.
Why?
Say it again.
Sure. So this is, I want to make myself become more with the divine. This is, I'm going to become that God itself. And I'm not connecting to the rest of the things. I'm going to make myself that. But you're right, because I think you're getting the fact that the two things are very linked.
Because they're the same.
Yeah.
They're very, very close to each other. Where does one end and when does one begin? This has to do more with my own self.
One's egotistical and one's your heart.
Selfless.
Is thaumaturgy kind of also like very similar to like the satanic practice of
That's what-
yourself as your own best person or whatever?
Yeah, it'd be over in
Yeah.
that order and thaumaturgy side. So when we get to order and chaos sides, witchcraft in general, contemporary witchcraft hangs out in order and thaumaturgy. They want to affect this realm, and they want to be the divine in this realm, that
makes
egotistic
sense.
side.
That makes sense.
And then this is, I want to expand beyond that and connect to all of the things as an encompassing concept.
So thaumaturgy is wrong. Got it.
Kind of. They do feed into one another, right? Because the more of this that I get, the better I am at service, which means that I can do this better,
Right.
or vice versa.
Mhm.
There's a,
Theurgy order would be like the monks wanting
right,
to like.
the Azteca
Oh.
schools.
Nice.
I think Christianity started here, and I think that it ended here, currently. Because it started with, I want to be part of all of the things, and I
Can we put
need
it on
to.
the chaos side?
No, I would say they're on the order side because they think they know it all.
They
They
have
have it
steps.
all programmed
Mhm.
and they're good to go.
Sure, I think Jeffrey Dahmer did too.
The Indian schools, the Azteca school from India is one of the ones that also has very ordered sequential steps. I want to become more with the one in an ordered way. When we get into, I want to become more with the one and get into chaos, you're doing drugs,
Yeah, LSD.
right? This is like
fun
psychedelics and that sort of
It's
thing.
faster.
Which is faster, but not maintainable over a long period of time because there's importance. You have to have some line between those. Eventually, you just melt that boundary, and then things go a little bit weird and not very constructive. Which is why.
Believe me, I know.
Yeah.
So what
Most of us do.
what's thaumaturgy
It's always a good
chaos?
story.
So this would be more of the modern chaos. The ones that are focused on this realm, I want to make things in this realm and affect this realm, and I'm just going to do it however I see fit. But nobody's just, it's not a binary. This is always a polarity, which is part of this, and we'll get into this too, that there's polarity in this. And I pull from the Hermetics on this one. So Hermetic philosophy talks about polarity. You're not just one or the other. It's not hot or cold. You're somewhere in that spectrum. Just like this, you're somewhere operating in either a theurgic way or a thaumaturgic way. You're in an ordered way or a chaotic way. But there's not one specific way to be. And they're not necessarily bad or good. People kind of arbitrarily call these bad or good, but I don't really ascribe to that. They're just so relativistic to call something bad or good. This tends to be more constructive, this tends to be more destructive. Whether it's good or bad is really up to your choice.
You have to be destroyed to be reborn.
And this is that same...
That's the, what is it, that's bad.
And that's the other, what you'll... I don't want to use that one because that one's not going to show up as well. That's where you get things like, and I'm not even going to try to draw this well.
I like it.
Yeah.
Oh, the snake that eats itself.
Or
I thought it was Pac-Man and Xbox.
Same.
the infinity symbol. When you twist the snake, you get this, which is the same concept as this infinite loop. You'll eventually, if you go too far chaos, you end up back in order, right? If you end up too much theurgy, you'll end up right back at thaumaturgy.
It's a balance.
It's all a polarity balance between those things.
So would
All
you say the goal
connected.
is to be right in the middle?
No, actually, I think you would think that.
Whatever works for you.
It's that, but I think it's also the experience.
Yeah, I was also saying, I think it's learning.
Yeah. When you get into like, I'm gonna hang out here for a little bit, or maybe I'll do this a little bit, or maybe I'll try this a little bit, and then you're making yourself a more rounded, complete experience than it just being,
Yeah.
I'm
Sure,
gonna be here
a
to be the
rounded witch.
one.
Right.
You know?
So now that we have a little bit of this in our brains, and again, I go at length other places, spell typologies. Okay, so let's see here. I'm gonna try and do this. I'll try to do this from my brain. We'll see what happens. I wrote this stuff, and we'll see if I actually remember it. I'm gonna have to move this with baptisms.
You're forgetting.
We're all in hell.
That's me. As soon as I erase it, immediately forgot.
What are we doing tonight?
Where are we going tomorrow?
Okay, so we have spell as the container. I'm going to abbreviate these things because I don't want to have to write them all the way out.
Excuse you.
Okay. Fancy letters, it doesn't really matter. We're gonna start doing like logic problems at this point. So spell is just a thing. It's a tool, it's a set of instructions, however we want to do that. But then we're going to aim at one or the other of thaumaturgy or theurgy. So what's your spell for? Where are you trying to aim, right? So this is giving us the idea of where we want the spell to focus on. Remember that charging and discharging component? That charging and discharging, for what end? We have to charge the thing for some sort of outcome. And this tells us where we're focusing that spell on. Are we going for less ego or more ego? Is it this realm or is it somewhere else, right? Yeah.
What would you cast that wouldn't affect this realm? What would you cast that would only, what would you put in that side?
So theurgic stuff, and I'll go through, and I'll get there, because I can get there. This one is charm, enchant, jinx, hex, and curse. Same thing on this side. So using one of these 5 types within a theurgic sense. It's a spell. What would we do that wouldn't affect this realm? Depends on where you put the flag, right? Where you plant where does it stop, right? For us, so for example, during Mabon, we did a thing called that I designed was just the apple hex, which is designed to hex yourself and destroy a thing. Now, this is why I say, where do you plant your flag, right? Is the fact that I've changed myself affecting this realm, or is that affecting my egoless self? You see where I'm saying how that, I'm not sure where you want to plant that flag. Because you could make an argument pretty strong that that does affect this realm, right? But my intent is not here. My intent is my internal egoless self.
That makes sense.
right? And so that's why the spell, when I started thinking about this, that I realized that it was going to have to either be for less ego or this more ego or manifest here, or I want, people who want to cast for money. That would be in the thaumaturgic side, right? Because I'm not trying to make myself more divine. And also, if you are in the idea of reincarnation, for example, are you casting a spell for something after you reincarnate, or for your next life? That could be a good question too. And again, where are we planting the flag? Does that affect this realm? Is it the same realm? Are we talking multiverse? It gets messy.
Yeah, makes sense though.
Yeah.
But essentially, my spells are focused on, am I going to aim for ego-less stuff, or focus on addressing my own internal id and ego, or am I doing something here? Am I doing a spell for good luck? Am I doing, for the day? Am I looking for prognostication? So we're talking about like divination stuff. So am I going to go and be like, okay, I'm going to pull a card for today? That to me would not be theory. That would definitely be in this thaumaturgic side, because I'm focused on here and now. Mm-hmm. Whereas when you're doing things like, let's see if I'm going to go there next. Almost, it actually doesn't get mentioned. But one of the ways that I would also consider theurgic spells is prayer. What is prayer but a theurgic spell? It's essentially a conversation with the divine that I'm having. And that is not necessarily affecting this realm, unless you're considering me the vessel of this realm, that the change of this, and then, that's why I go, how do I make that distinction? But that's why I put this here, so it helps people talk about this. So we have like we've talked about in the church too, we want to develop a flexible common narrative, instead of just saying, this is the one true witchcraft. Generally speaking, everyone's going to fall somewhere in this grid. Pretty much every single religion, and I keep trying, one of the things that I do very explicitly whenever I make hard lines like this, I start categorizing things, and I would encourage everybody to do this too, is if you start categorizing things, try to break it. Try to figure out where you went wrong, because you're not right all the way. Something in whatever I've said is probably incorrect at some level. So this is a good starting point, you have a good basis, but I'm not the only source. You are your best source. Listen to other people and figure out what works for you is the most important thing. Don't just say, oh, this is everything. This is witchcraft. This is one way to understand it. This is one relatively linear, accessible way to engage with witchcraft. And magic and other religious systems if you really want to go that far. So the way that I did this is that all 5 of these basic ones, charm, enchant, jinx, hex, curse, is so labeled because a lot of times we'll say charm for spell, or we'll use these interchangeably up here. But aren't all of these some form of spell in that of themselves? So this is how I got to this, and I'm sure this is going to evolve with time. So this is when I talk about spell typologies, and this is just the types of spells that exist. What category we're focusing on, what type of thing we are doing. And on my next one, we'll get there. So time mechanics is another component of this. Spells aren't necessarily immediate, right? This is one of the pieces of that neuro-linguistic programming and that synchronicity. So resonance and synchronicity, tying into your intuition. Intuition comes from your environment, meaning all of your sensory awareness, how focused you are, and how much you're able to almost unfocus and have that secondary underlying awareness that happens within your world, right? I don't encourage, and none of us do, as far as I'm aware, we don't encourage spell babysitting. If you cast a spell, don't start hunting for it. It will probably happen. You have to trust the process and allow it to unfold as it's going to, because there's way too many variables, you're not going to find them all, and it's going to be way too hard to point to exactly what the way that's going to happen. It's just too complicated. It's much easier to say, I'm going to have this intent, I want this outcome, and let it go. And keep it in the back of your mind. Start, you may want to do this reflection. So which journals and that sort of thing, or just journals in general, you can say, I did this thing, and then later on down the road, 6 months later, you might be writing, wow, I have all this great new luck, and everything's really working out for me. And you look back, and you're like, wait a minute, I did a spell for this 6 months ago. This is what I mean by time mechanics. And there's some more temporal mechanics we'll talk about too, but basically it's that.
I'd like to bring up a little story.
Sure.
So I've had really bad luck specifically with my car in the last couple months, where it was stolen and the clutch broke and then it was hit and ran. It's like September, October, November. And then I finally started delving into a little bit of like, maybe I was hexed or something like that. and found this church and did a smoke cleansing thing with some Palo Santo. And so that was a few days ago, just around the car, and then I had a court date yesterday where I had a speeding ticket for driving with no insurance, no tags, because it was stolen and I was using a different car during those couple days, and it's a 12-point speeding ticket. Could have gotten my license taken away. During court, all charges dropped, 0 points,
Wow.
just a $30
Wow.
fine.
Hey.
That's
So kind of a change in luck,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
kind of immediately.
A change
After.
in trajectory,
Mhm.
right? And it's those kinds of things. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. Certainly, and spells are not necessarily super immediate. For example, there's a lot of times that I do spells that would be thaumaturgic, for developing the church, for example. I want to bring more people in. I want to give this off to people. It's doing those things, praying for those things, doing rituals during moons, and so on and so forth. There's a whole variety of ways, which we'll talk about. I'm not going to talk about all of them. This is not comprehensive. This is just a primer to get you started on your way. And if you have any questions about that too, we also have the Embers program for mentorship. So if you want to do that, you can go to our website and fill out the Embers application, and you can get a mentor. And we will just help you with this. So if you still feel lost after this and you want more, we're available for that if you should want it. So, like I said, that spell babysitting thing, try to avoid that as much as you possibly can. Because I think it tends to sour, at least in my experience when I've babysat spells before and tried to make them come to fruition. Then I end up with a lot of,
You're bringing
misintent.
anxiety to it.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, is it gonna happen? And then your intent's not there anymore.
Right.
I feel like the best thing you can do is put it in like your book of shadows or whatever journal you keep, and then just kind of put it away and then
Mhm.
look at it later.
Yeah, you can definitely do that. One of the things that I use, and I've talked about this at length, but I have a magic field log, and basically it's just a book that I write stuff in, that I test spells in, and it's basically just a scientific process through that. And seeing if I can replicate the results. And if I can replicate the results, then that goes in my book of shadows. If it becomes part of my ritual stuff, then it goes in my book of shadows.
It's a really good idea.
Right.
I know.
Well, also kind of like with that stuff, like babysitting the spell, like what if it's not supposed to happen, and that's the reason why it's not working is because it's not supposed to happen right now, or or just like no, you think this is what you want, but it's actually not. So the universe is trying to be like, no, we're gonna shut that down. Actually,
Yeah.
Exactly.
If you have a scientific method for magic and it works, why is it not proven?
What do you mean?
Like, why are we still here in a smaller group, they say, being the only ones here?
Why aren't we a
Magic is
mega
real.
church?
Yeah, like, why is, I don't mean that in a negative, I mean, like,
Yeah. No,
if you
I-
can have scientific method for magic, why is the rest of the populace not like, look, it's science?
Well, one guy on TikTok was trying to do that, like, hey, hex me, do the things to me. I don't know what ended up happening to him, but he did the same thing,
Well, much like Wynn was saying, that it may not be the time for it. The variables may not be there to support that. The vehicle to get there may not be present, right?
I do feel like the car is going there, though.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, everything's way more open.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, I know. Like trying to practice witchcraft like now than 14 years ago when I like started is not a thing.
Oh,
then.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's this belief in Hinduism where there's like ages of humanity or something, like Golden Age, Silver Age, Bronze Age, and then a Black
Yeah, I heard
Age.
that.
And the Black Age is called Kali Yuga, which is what most people think we are in right now, where it's very religious. But some other properties of that are, if you want to find spirituality or magic or something, it'll be very easily accessible. Meanwhile, the world is burning around you.
Interesting.
Yep.
Interesting.
And then we give it one more second. 1, 2, 3,
Good
4,
Lord.
5. Okay, now I know when to cut the video. Yeah, different ages is, right. There's a lot of ways to codify how time moves. Making sure that I get through all of these. We got through the spell map. Okay, so we're almost there. So time mechanics can be part of that ritual side. So time mechanics might be, for example, I may want to get rid of something. And I'm just giving you an errant, random example. Have a chalice, you put water into it, and you wait for the water to evaporate. It literally takes time for it to evaporate, and with that, it carries it away. You can also do the same thing with lighting something on fire. You're taking away the intention, is another manner of doing that. Or you may have a bowl, and you may have nothing in it, but you want to learn or add knowledge, for example. You're adding things to it every single day and setting that intent every day. So you're adding things over time. So time mechanics can factor into spells as well. Whether you're trying to add something, take something away, those kinds of things. Or time your own spells, right? So if you have a spell and you want it to end at a certain time, then you have water in it and you let it evaporate, and then you know, oh, spell's done, time to clean up. But one of the things I did not talk about, I haven't written down, is spell detritus, right? So if you're working in your house all the time, you have a whole bunch of spell work that you're doing, sure, not all it's going the right place, or it's not going the right direction. So there's, you may want to cleanse every so often in your space, or you might want some sort of grounding material to do that. You can do that like you were suggesting with obsidian, onyx, those sorts of things, to bring those energies and kind of lightning rod that stuff together so you don't get a bunch of like chaotic effects and things just go awry. It's already complicated, don't make it harder. You can ritualize your spells, so you can put those under time sequences, so that could be at a phase of the moon, a specific day, a specific time, whatever that is. You can do that when, in the morning, at night, just whatever you're doing, you can change that. It may be based on transits as well, so astrological transits may factor into that. Consider these things. They're not all of them, it's not exhaustive, it's not meant to be, but consider these kinds of correspondences. Consider what's in your environment, and consider the materials that you're using in your environment, right? Correspondence is one of the bigger ones of just what things mean, right? So black tends to be protection, it tends to be negating, white tends to be purity, or it tends, quartz tends to be one that you can use for a variety of different purposes. And correspondences are going to matter. Different time sequences, so if you're at this specific time, there's going to be a specific angel for that specific time with this specific, sequence of ritualized behavior. All of those correspondences can factor. The time of the season can also factor in those spells, right? So if you're doing something at Maban or doing something at Yule, which is coming up, so you might want to consider your correspondences for Yule. So all those correspondences are things to consider as well. Two forms of magic that I also want to talk about is that sort of beyond this is about the shape that a spell takes. Has to do with either sympathetic magic or contagion magic. So sympathetic magic is like for like. Think puppet dolls. Culturally appropriated, you can also think voodoo dolls or hoodoo dolls. A likeness of the thing, an effigy, is going to have an impact on somebody else because of their likeness. And that could be the same thing with, I want to wear tiger claws for more, aggression, right? These are sympathetic one-to-one sorts of things. Contagion magic is about things that are closer to you, so things that are going to touch you. So something like a charm that would have a curse or something along those lines, right? You could curse an object, you could hex an object. And with that said, handing that off could cause other problems, right? If you so chose to do that. This is not a lesson in ethics, just considerations of tools that exist for you to utilize. At your own risk, at your own behest, we don't condone any of these behaviors, we're just letting you have the tools. So sympathetic magic has to do with that imitation and that correspondence. Like for like. Your contagion magic has to do with contact or impact from. So somebody near you or somebody impacting you from that direction, it's those kinds of things. You're not using an effigy, you're not using a likeness or a picture. Recently somebody in the church Discord asked about the wolves, and we're asking how do we introduce gray wolves back into the area? Should we focus on the people? Should we focus on the wolves? And I was like, why don't you focus on the area? Right, they're like, well, and I said you could get a picture of the area, bless the area. And if you can't get a picture of the area, get something that's like their habitat and call that in. That would be a form of sympathetic magic. Questions on that before I continue? Cool. Divination is another type of magic, and divination has to do with I want to foretell things. I'm going to pull things from dreams, I'm going to pull things from tarot. Those kinds of things don't necessarily fall underneath the could arguably fall into spell, but they're not necessarily a sympathetic thing, and they're not necessarily a contagion thing. They're a whole other branch. Arguably you could call alchemy, and there's a different branch of magic as well that doesn't necessarily incorporate spells, but could, because I could make a tincture, alchemically speaking, and then do a spell on that thing, and I could ritualize or ceremonialize that, or do all of those things. So these are building blocks that you're going to put together for yourselves. The two places that I would also talk about is mancy versus urgy, the two suffixes. So theurgy tends to be the urgy ending, or that suffix tends to be ideas of, how do I describe urgy exactly? Mancy has to do with the doing, so like, for example, necromancy would be the divination of the dead, right? Or death divination. Whereas urgy is more of a philosophy or realm or component of that versus it being a divination style. So thaumaturgy would make more sense to talk about like death magic, for example, versus necromancy, which would be more like death divination or death, or through, you know, chthonic energies, right? Chiromancy, for example, ice divination. I don't know what urgy would be in that. Something just to consider if you see these suffixes, that it can kind of give you an idea of what the nature of it is. So you might not be doing a spell or one of these typologies, you may be doing something different. And it's just for you to sort of have an idea or a metric or some sort of signal to go, oh, that's what this is for, right? So I wouldn't just be, you know, if I'm working with chthonic energies, I'm not probably going to be doing necromancy, right? I'll be working with like bones, for example, right? And I'm not necessarily doing divination, I'm specifically doing a magic spell with that. And so that to me would be in the realm of that mancy side versus, or that urgy side versus that mancy side. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. I know that's a little convoluted, but they're just good flags for you on that. Before I get into this last piece, I'm going to give you the 5 types of spells that I came across that are most common. And that was, first was the charm. It's to imbue an object with an intent or instruction. Enchantment is similar, but it imbues a magical aspect to an area, right? Not necessarily an instruction. So for example, whenever you cast a circle for sacred space, you're enchanting a specific area. You're not charming an object. You're not giving it an instruction. We don't have a, we're getting a notification the library is going to close on us. We might just live here now. We'll have to enchant the library. You can enchant things like houses, fields, and also along with that, sacred and profane spaces, and define those, right? So when you consecrate a church, or when a church is consecrated, it's being enchanted, essentially. You're not, and you could argue that it might be a charm, but you can, again, where do you plant that flag?
So would like enchantments be like on things that it's not going to be moving?
Often. It could be an enchanted car? I don't know. That's a good question.
Harry Potter.
So I have a knowledge board that sits in the occult library, and it is in a magical, it's an enchanted board, and basically it's to imbue more knowledge quicker and to assess and learn more information faster. But it's not a charm because it's not a specific object that's worn. So charms tend to be worn, whereas enchantment isn't necessarily worn.
So it could be?
I think it could.
Okay.
I think it could. Yeah.
Where do you plant that flag?
Right? Jinx is basically an inconveniencing thing, something that hassle or annoy, those sorts of things. Short term, not super intense. You kick it up a notch, you go up to hex, and hex, in my opinion, would be more of that baneful, malefic sort of stuff. I want to harm, I want to hurt, I want to damage, whatever that is. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Again, the apple hex, for example, was intended to destroy an aspect of the self that you didn't want anymore, right? That's not bad. It just depends on what you want to do. Having a thought. Right. Curse is akin to hex and can be generational. So hexes tend to not be generational. It's usually one lifetime, one person, one focus, one target. Scope of these things is going to matter. So whatever type of spell you're doing, if you're trying to do a thing for like a whole area or a whole group of people or a whole group of objects, it's going to require a heavier lift. And I would recommend using some sort of assistance, whether that's some sort of external stuff, right? So deities, elements, something that you're bringing in to assist with that lift. The more you do it, the easier it gets. It's just like exercising, right? So your scope and focus is going to matter within your spellcraft, whatever you're doing. You want to know what you're doing and how big it's going to be, the area of effect, right? The bigger the effect, the less familiar you are with it, the harder it's going to be, and the bigger you're going to want to do more stuff. So ritualizing and ceremonies and that sort of thing to bring in those things and pay the due respect, to bring that in to assist with those things. This is why spells can take a longer time, because you may be incorporating several things to prepare to do a larger spell. So you might, incorporate a deity. Let's just pick Hecate for whatever reason, and let's just pick the dark moon and say you have to do 13 dark moons to prepare and pay fealty to this. Then that's great, and then you do the spell. You're talking like a year to even do the spell. Not saying that's a requirement, just that it's a consideration. Any thoughts on that? No. Okay, cool. So, charm, enchant, jinx, hex, curse, right? And you can do them in a thaumaturgic or theurgic manner, and all of those are in the classification of spell. And now, since my tablet's not working, you get to see the back of this computer.
So are you still getting to the baptism part, or?
Yes.
No, it's
Okay.
just sitting there.
It's
No, I just
just-
wasn't sure if you forgot about it or not.
I did not.
If you wanted to do a type of spell where you're not having very good production of crops, you're missing out on a lot of pollination, would you do like a spelling bee to get the bees to?
Maybe you do something aromatic. Maybe you want to, work with the agriculture deity of some iteration to create more aromatics, to draw more bees in, instead of trying to say, hey, bees, come over here.
Did you say a deity?
That's what I heard.
Love it.
Wow. Move on. So and this is rough, and this is the best basis that I could come up with at the moment. The first step to this is you want to set your spell focus and scope. Determine implementation, theurgy or thaumaturgy, and consider your deities, elements, entities, the correspondences. Establish your intended target, whether it's an individual, a group, or a location. Specific realm, geographic region, physical location. 2, classify your spell polarity. Polarity refers to benefic or malefic intent, right? So do I want to, so basically positive, negative, constructive, destructive, those pieces. Classify your spell type. This stuff, charm, enchant, jinx, hex, curse. What are we doing? And then after you classify your spell type, you determine the temporal aspect, if applicable. Determine if the spell will be enacted once or is a candidate for replication, multi-use, because some spells are just one and done and you don't do it again. That's a very likely possibility. Waxing, over time, do you add material or materials to the initial spell? Waning, waiting for the spell to run its course and deplete initial material or materials. Target a specific hour, day, week, or month. It may incorporate transits and astrology. 5, write a script, the behavior sequence. This is the point to incorporate poetry, stories, dance, artwork, other divine systems or traditions, or the inclusion of rituals. The art of spellcraft is in this particular place. Consider the use of spell where spells in ritual and or ceremony, like I was saying at the beginning. After written and enacted, we encourage staying observant for the outcome or result of the spell, if any. It is discouraged, like we said, to fixate on the spell and the end result, spell babysitting. D, your replication of spells and the result is encouraged. The efficacy of a spell may change, falter, fail, increase, decrease, etc. over time. Your modality might change. You might lose connection with the deity. You might be in a weird head state. Also, highly don't recommend. I really don't recommend. If you're in a state where you're compromised, just don't. Just take a seat and just wait. Yeah. Just consider that. In many instances, a replication of a spell is not prudent. Review the temporal item. So it might not be the right time to do it. It might be the only time that you do this. It might be, every 258 years this thing comes around and this specific thing happens and you're not going to do this ever again in your life. That could happen, right? If I really wanted to, riff off of that, what would happen if we deal with these sequences of, like, let's just use this one example of 258 years, right? And you do believe in reincarnation. Do you do a spell in each lifetime at every 258-year junction? Do you send it forward? That's a really interesting question. I don't have an answer.
Really cool movie.
Yeah, right?
Cloud
Done.
Atlas.
Yeah. Neuromancy, so dream divination, for me, I want to affect a realm. So I'm trying to impact, my spells tend to interact with that realm specifically, and I wouldn't necessarily classify that as this physical plane. It's definitely somewhere else as the substrate of this physical realm. That's a whole other thing. I have an entire month-long class on just oneiromancy, and that's just the beginning stuff. So if you're interested in that, let us know down below. Other than that, that finishes it. With the exception of baptisms, now that I looked at the board, I'm glad I wrote that down. Baptism would be, what do you think? Now that you've heard all this, what do you think a baptism is?
A jinx. Sorry.
Depends on how you look on it. I would say that it's more of a ceremony because you're moving from one phase to another
Yep,
with rituals and instructions in place.
right. It's a ceremony that has rituals within it that has some sort of spell casting. Baptism is pretty witchy in just its construction in that of itself.
Dude, everything in Catholicism is pretty witchy. Let's just
Shh,
say it.
don't let the Catholics hear you. It's okay, we
So
love
If
you
you're
guys.
I don't
Catholic,
know
leave a
much.
comment below.
I don't know much about baptisms, but is it supposed to signify becoming part of like the world or something like that? Do you think that's more
Accepting
theurgic
of
or?
Christ, actually, I think is what it
It's like
is.
starting fresh, almost like
Mhm.
like
Starting
you
over.
had sin
Yeah.
when you were born, and then you're born. Now you're born again in like
Yeah.
this kind of
And is it
new
something
light
you're
of
doing
Christ.
yourself or that someone else is doing to you?
Someone
Like
else
Something-
usually does it to
something
you.
maybe or
So like a
something?
priest or
Yeah.
someone high up in the church.
So like in our space in witchcraft, we do it ourselves, like, in Wicca, I think it's like a year and a day or something
Mhm.
like that. It's kind of the same as a baptism, but usually with a baptism and in the Christian realm, someone's doing it to you, the water and
Mhm.
all that stuff, which is pretty witchy.
Right.
And in aspect of, Church of Witchcraft, we also will host dedications and rededications. So that's up to you if you want to include that, or if you want people to come in and just hang out and be like, hey, cool, you're doing the thing. We're glad that you're here. We recognize that you're doing the thing. That's part of what we're doing here. So the clergy can oversee dedications and rededications as well. So consider that, and if you want more information, feel free to email us. You can call us. You can get on Meetup, Facebook, Discord, take your pick. There's some way that you can reach us. I haven't
Throw
figured
a
out.
stick.
To throw a stick, right? If you can't
It
find
come from the
us,
shadows, but what, did someone
I'll
call?
just knock on
Send
the
a
back of the
homing
closet, yeah.
pigeon.
Cast a spell.
yeah, do some divination, throw some bones, throw some runes, do something.
But
like-
don't babysit that spell.
Yes,
No,
exactly. So thank you for watching again this wonderful sermon. I was glad to have all of you here. Thank you for your questions. And like I said, don't forget about our Embers program and any other thing, and the services from the church as well. And if you're a witch to do this, just come hang out with us.